Albany, Rochester, Buffalo, you'll find a fusion of jazz and hip-hop. The rhythms in from the bright lights of NYC to the falls of Niagara. Every corner, every town, we're all connected, brother.
Welcome,
Great intro.
everyone. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. We're so happy that you're here in August to find out how are we going to find and fund a genuine space economy. We have a great panel of guests, and we have an excellent lineup of stuff to talk about. I'm going to be turning the table over right this minute to Mr. Lou Zaccarilla. Lou, how are you?
I'm fine, Tamara. Thank you. Thank you for turning that table over. There's a lot to turn over here in New York State, right? There's a lot of issues to deal with today.
Oh, Tamara's malaprops continue. Okay.
We're going to learn from the experts today about how to find and fund a space economy.
Okay. Thank you for that. Let me just tell everybody very quickly, while you're in the space, you are actually muted. You will not be able to come off of mute, but we do want you to know that the chats are wide open. We welcome your questions during the chats. We're going to be watching the chat so that we ask questions at the end of our panelists and guests. And with that, Lou, do you want to take us into talking about who got us in this room?
I sure do. And again, thank you everyone for making the time. This is for us a really important discussion because we are all New Yorkers, at least your hosts here are. And this is a state that we want to see grow into a legitimate space economy based state. But we wouldn't be here today with our terrific guests if it wasn't for the sponsorship and support of three particular organizations and companies. One is the Luxembourg Trade and Investment Group in New York, and we appreciate their ongoing support. Satshore has been our long-term sponsor as well, so we thank Sanjay Nakanti and his terrific startup company, and of course, Daruva Space, another long-term sponsor of the Roundtable. Without them, again, we wouldn't be able to come here and both set up the table and then, when necessary, Tamara, turn it over. So, also supporting us, you can see our many loyal supporters. You'll be hearing actually from two of them today, actually three of them today. Space News Magazine, who you hear from shortly, Empire Space, who is represented on our panel, and a special guest later from the NASA New York Space Grant. So we're really well represented from our supporting organizations today.
All right. Okay. And I stopped here because I want to know if you want to say more stuff, or shall I roll the videotape?
Well, no, we're at the end of summer, so what we typically do, of course, is show our Better Satellite World campaign footage, although one week we showed Saturday Night Live for the UAP footage. But this week it's kind of a sad time here in the Northeast because it's the end of summer. So I guess we call this our end of summer sign-off, Tamara, huh?
That's what we'll call it. Let's do it.
All right. From a very special group, by the way. Yeah, love that. So Space Shuttle Children's Trust Fund, one of our supporting organizations, and we thank them for that. Very, very nice. Okay, well, let's get into it. This is the end of summer, but it's just the beginning of the conversation about whether New York State can be a spacefaring economy or not. So what we're going to try to do is go around the table today and to talk about other best practices around the world and talk about what it actually takes to find and fund a local or regional space economy. But as we do every month, we are going to start with our significant digits report and our friend Jason Rainbow, who is coming to us from Central Florida today. Jason, welcome.
Hello, hello. It's good to be back. I'm not ready for it to be nearly end of summer. I haven't even had a chance to go to the beach yet. That's not good news.
I know we've had some storms here in the Northeast too, where we can't get in, but hopefully, you know, we'll get some cool Canadian air. Things will calm down because the Canadians are calm, and we'll get into our warm ocean. Jason, this month and next, we're going to be looking at the convergence between the growing space and satellite industry and its impact on economic development and growth in states and regions around the globe, as I said. And I know Space News probably is the leader in reporting on some of this convergence. You've taken a look at individual states, what they're doing, even nations. Of course, Luxembourg, I think in many ways leads the way in terms of nations growing their space economies. Best practices. Have you seen or heard or reported on anything that relates to a rapid growth in space-related activities and businesses in regions or nations that is worth us hearing about?
Yeah, so my colleague, Deborah Werner, recently came back from the annual Utah State University Small Satellite Conference, which I don't know if you know, but that started out in 1987 as a small gathering of professors seeking cheap ways to augment aerospace engineering education with tiny satellites. But it is now a big deal, attracting somewhere around 4,000 participants. And in addition to professors, also now includes military officers and industry professionals, but while still having a very big student focus. Anyway, nothing specifically came up on this front at the conference, but she did note there just seems to be kind of underlying increase in US, European, Asian startups establishing or talking about establishing offices in Colorado, which I thought was interesting. Colorado tries to make itself very friendly to the industry, and companies always cite its proximity to Space Force and Air Force organizations, plus contractors and suppliers. We're also seeing New Mexico as particularly eager to attract space-related companies. It has a whole state initiative, which we reported about last year, called Pathways to the Stars. Starting in elementary school and continuing through early careers, companies and government agencies are developing curriculum, mentoring, and career service to encourage students and young professionals to opt for space-related jobs. New York, Arizona, Michigan, Virginia, and Washington are among states also making great efforts to support existing space businesses and attract new ones. Meanwhile, like Colorado, Alabama, California, Florida, and Texas have vibrant space economies, partly thanks to the presence of government and prime contractor facilities and the startups that they in turn attract. In contrast to other states, though, it's interesting how California doesn't seem to bend over backwards to help its aerospace industry as much, which we've also reported about before. It still attracts startups, of course, because there's it's a great workforce there and venture capital funding in the area. But we've seen companies like Orbit Fab and Capella start out in California to then either move to or establish manufacturing facilities elsewhere, Colorado in those two cases. And we're still waiting to really see what Elon meant when he said he was moving SpaceX to Texas, because so far, I think manufacturing is still going on in Hawthorne, California. It'll also be interesting to watch Texas grapple with Starship noise, pollution, and everything else that comes with a bustling space hub. One other initiative we're keeping a close eye on is Maine Space 2030, which was announced last year to raise awareness of the space venture scene in Maine and realize the industry's economic potential. By 2030, Maine wants to be an integral player in the emerging global network of suborbital and orbital transportation to space. And the initiative includes multiple education, business, government, and research programs to help get there. By 2045, Maine wants to have captured at least 10% of the US small satellite launch market. And then finally, just outside the US, I'll mention two recent developments. Bulgaria-based Endurosat has announced plans to build Botswana's first satellites in partnership with a university from the country in Southern Africa. Engineers from Botswana's International University of Science and Technology are joining the manufacturer's team in Bulgaria to help make the CubeSat. We've seen knowledge sharing being baked into satellite manufacturing deals before, particularly in the Middle East. And I think it's going to be a growing trend as more nations seek ways to develop their domestic space economies. And also, the European Space Agency recently announced plans to increase its presence in the United Kingdom as the country announced $3 million of funding for programs seeking to address space industry skills gaps, which I thought was interesting. The funding from the UK space industry is for 5 space-related training programs, including professional development courses and training modules, led by universities, the Royal Institute of Navigation, and a private education specialist. And this is just, it's another interesting move in the context of Brexit. The UK is still very much part of the European Space Agency, even though it's no longer part of the European Union, but it is now on this major drive to beef up its domestic capabilities. And space will be a major part of this industrial growth strategy, from what I'm hearing from their recently elected government, but it's still early. We're still waiting for concrete details on what that would actually mean. So that's all I've got for you today. I hope that frames your discussion.
Yeah, it's terrific. Of course, as usual, I can't let you go. I got a few questions for you. Terrific insights. I hadn't heard about that Maine 2030 initiative. What it sounds like, Jason, and there's two questions here. One is the states that really are serious about this are also serious about developing the talent now, right? So that when that part of the economy emerges, the skill sets will be there. If I got that right, is that a consistent through line here?
That's right. Yeah, it's not just about poaching them from other states or other countries. You want to have a domestic production, for lack of a better word, to have ingrown talent, and then of course you retain that, so they don't just leave the state once they develop the skills that is getting so much investment these days.
Right. When you refer to Botswana and other countries, of course, we know Luxembourg very well, as I mentioned at the outset. And of course, the UK will have a representative who's based in the UK today on our panel who can talk very intelligently about this, as well as Colorado. Are they putting it within the framework of specific gross domestic product, GDP goals or economic goals? I know Luxembourg is, and I believe the UK has set some goals for market share. You mentioned Maine is going after market share. Have there been sort of generally set specific economic goals?
Specific targets? Not that I'm aware of. I know the UK for the longest time had this, and maybe your guest can actually help fill me in a bit here, but the longest time it had this goal of capturing 10% of the space industry, but has really not really talked about that in recent years. I think it's hard to capture this when the space industry itself is growing and playing catch up. But yeah, I haven't seen it broken down. That would be interesting to figure out if that is actually something they're willing to commit publicly about.
Yeah, I've always thought that was a little bit challenging anyway, right? When we'll ask Rob Desborough about that, but to say we're going to make 10% of GDP growth or whatever, I mean, if things explode properly, I mean, you'll exceed that, and if they don't, you won't. So I've always thought that was kind of spurious. Just a final question on Texas, because that Texas Space Commission, from everything we hear, is again legitimately supported by the state with some serious funding and support. Does that seem structural, and is it because Elon has said he's going to leave California in the dust or in the ocean?
Yeah, I don't know the ins and outs of that, to be honest. That's not something I've covered, looked at too closely. But I will say, it's not just about developing capabilities for early stage space companies, which we seem to talk about a lot, getting these pioneering technologies proven. You also need to have the infrastructure, the financing there to then scale up these businesses, to be able to sell these products in all corners of the world. You need to have kind of a significant chunk of financing waiting for these companies once they get to the stage where they can finally start talking about commercializing their product. And I think that is it. I think not just Texas, I think that is just widely something which is kind of missing from a lot of these plans at the moment. I know it's something that companies complain a lot about. This, getting that next step after you get your initial funding, your early stage funding rounds, the next leap to become a viable, sustainable business.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today, Jason. So again, thanks for setting up the table brilliantly as usual. What are you working on now? What are we going to see?
I can't speak myself. I can't tell you. I'm looking forward to AST Space Mobile's first operational direct-to-device satellite launch, which is happening, I think it's in a few weeks. We've been waiting for that for a long, long time. So all right. Fingers crossed it all goes well.
Yeah, hear that, Rob? Okay. Jason, thanks again. It's always great to see you. And I know you'll probably stick around to get some questions in or answered. All right.
Thank you.
Listen, we appreciate it, and we appreciate what Space News does here. Okay, as usual, I think Jason has set the table nicely for us. So let's go right to the panel. And I'm going to start with my friend, Carolyn Belle. Carolyn is one of the industry's premier strategy consultants with Aurica Space Strategy Consulting. Ms. Belle specializes in guiding clients in areas such as space industry growth and diversification. As a consultant at Northern Sky Research, Ms. Belle pioneered its practice in new space, on-orbit servicing, and small satellites. Her expertise includes space sustainability, emerging satellite applications, and the creation of novel space architectures. She started her career, by the way, in astrobiology research before focusing on work related to dynamic industry expansion. So exactly what we're talking about today. And of course, she's just right for today's roundtable and just about any discussion in this industry. Carolyn, good to see you again.
Yeah, thanks. Good to be here.
And you're coming to us from Colorado. So we're going to circle back on that Colorado item that Jason presented.
Absolutely.
Up next is this gentleman, Patrick Chase. Patrick is a co-founder at Empire Space here in the Empire State of New York, born and raised in Rochester, New York, the greatest city in the world, at least to those of us who grew up there, and Joe Fargnoli, who lives there. He's the penultimate space geek who turned a political science degree and career into deep expertise in actually a career examining the intersection of space and politics. He's been doing some fascinating work. They've begun to really launch a new age of enthusiasm and growth for space and astronomy across the state of New York. And Patrick and his team are guiding its attempts at economic relevance in the industry at large. Patrick, it's always great to see you.
Thank you very much for having us. It's a pleasure to be back. I do need to get you guys a new photo. My hair might be a touch longer now than it is in the one you have on file, so I'll be sure to get that for you guys in the future. But thanks again for having us. It's going to be a fantastic discussion. I just wanted to kind of echo and second everything that Jason said. A lot of what he said is stuff that we've found in our own research. So that was really quite an intro.
Very good. And by the way, you're handsome with short hair or long. Don't worry about that. Rob Desborough. Rob is a general partner at Seraphim Space Manager, the world's leading specialist investor in space tech. He is the manager of the London Stock Exchange listed Seraphim Space Investment Trust, heading up its early stage investments. Rob is also a co-founder of Seraphim Space Accelerator, which was launched about 6 years ago, I believe in 2018, and today is among the world's leading accelerator programs for space tech startups. Under Mr. Desborough's guidance, this accelerator has graduated, at least at the time, 91 space tech startups, which have collectively raised $340 million plus in co-investments syndicated from 100 or so venture capital investors. He is a fund representative on the boards of Zona Space Systems, Altitude Angel, and other early stage investments. Of note, he holds degrees in biomedical science and information technology systems, and he is the only person who has appeared on both the New York and London Space Business Roundtables. Rob, you made history today. Welcome.
Thanks, Lou. Great to be here today and have the opportunity to bring to life the excitement that is the space industry.
Yeah, and it really is excitement, and of course, you helped make it so. Let me start with you because again, we're trying to take a look at, as we said, what makes a place investment ready. Why, as you say, you can look for nuggets in a place that is suitable for a Seraphim to come in. Seraphim, of course, makes investments in our sector globally, as I noted. Can you, again, broadly, Rob, can you identify the critical elements that you might look for from the government sector when seeking the businesses that have those right nuggets that transform into a profitable, scalable set of enterprises that, again, would drive the kinds of economies I think we're looking for?
Yeah, well, I think we're in a unique position as space investors. We've now supported over 130 companies globally in just under 30 countries. So we have a pretty good understanding of the activities globally, both in terms of countries who are building their own indigenous capability, but also countries who are looking to better shape the proposition for onshoring to attract companies to locate in their own regions. And I think what's really interesting about space and space entrepreneurs, which I haven't seen outside of this sector in my near sort of 20 years doing venture capital, is they tend to think globally from day one, and front of mind is always capital. So they are looking to identify capital, but not just at the early stage, it's capital across that entire funding continuum. So countries who have a sophisticated early stage investment strategy, but also can support at the later stage the scale up rounds and also potentially the IPO markets as well. That is very much front of mind for companies, but as companies evolve, it's also about how do we take cost out of a business as well. And that's pretty critical at Series A and beyond, when investors are increasingly asking in this market, do I want to have to manage that financial risk of this company needing a further, 300 million to get to market? Can I identify the investors to cover those additional costs? Or can I actually take cost out of a business by relocating manufacturing to a different territory globally? That's often the case when we're looking at companies in the Belle Area as well, where costs are incredibly high and the competition for talent is extreme as well. So you might keep the DNA in San Francisco, but do you outsource the manufacturing, further development into the UK, India? We're seeing it's getting quite competitive as well from the Canadian market. So I think if you can address capital, address costs, and make it capacity efficient for companies to move into new territories, that's critical. I think customers as well is a really interesting one. Why are companies locating to Colorado? It's typically because they're dual use technologies and US government is their #1 customer. It's the DoD that's driving that. If we look at what does London have, it's got one of the biggest insurance markets in the world, and that's where we're seeing a lot of customer interest from the insurance market. It might be due to sustainability, climate change, assessing catastrophic loss, but ultimately they're the end application customers. So I think that drives a lot of engagement as well. I mean, overall, what we're seeing is a very competitive ecosystem. We've now got over 80 countries globally that have set up space agencies or are looking to set up space agencies. That's a fourfold increase realistically on where we were 4 or 5 years ago.
That's right.
And I think what's interesting, it's not just the countries who want to share of this multi-trillion-dollar economy and they want to build their own, critical infrastructure and resilience. It's also, we're seeing that within the US market as well. So we've actually moved our center of operations around the accelerator down to Los Angeles, where we're seeing a huge amount of engagement there from the early stage VC scene, space in the Bay Area has to compete against other opportunities like AI, quantum, software, and so on. So I think Los Angeles is a really interesting area. You've got a growing ecosystem there. There's lots of space interested investors. So we're seeing companies set up there, but they might be doing the manufacturing in Texas. So I think, over time, these companies will evolve. They have different needs. As the UK comes into ITAR potentially alongside of Australia, the UK will be a very natural base for US companies looking to expand globally. Companies also need to set up ground stations, business development centers. So I think there's, how can you support the indigenous economy? I think going into universities really early on and saying, you've got some great technology there, you can build a $50 million business terrestrially, but actually, if you put it in space, you can build $1 billion business. So I think, giving them that right platform, that right aspiration around what space can bring, and then really making sure there's the supply chain there in terms of funding continuum, capital, end customers around the applications as well to really help validate the opportunity. I think, looking at early procurement from the government is another key driver as well. Then from an onshoring perspective, how can you provide a really attractive destination for companies to take cost out of the business so we don't need to raise so much capital in the future?
Yeah. Thanks for that, Rob. That's really thorough. And there are some other elements too, like culture, location, which we can talk about later, as you and I have spoken about that. I have two quick questions for you before I move on to Patrick and Carolyn, though. First of all, the transformation of a place into, as you say, adding on the vertical market of the space economy, which would allow them to perhaps scale a set of business products and services. When you go to certain places and you talk to them about transforming their economies or building their cities out for the 21st century, and you ask them who they want to be, for example, they'll all say, we want to be Silicon Valley. We want to be Silicon Valley. And I always think or say to them, you can't be. Silicon Valley is unique to California. Does it require, and I'm leading to New York State on this, Rob, which is a post-industrial state in many parts. Do they need to re-identify themselves? Do they need to undergo this significant plastic surgery? Or can they be more of what they are and just, lay the groundwork as you described, but put all the elements in place? How do you look at that as an investor?
I think as an investor, you want to know, are there genuine signals of interest to focus on this sector? Are they going to do, unique funding plans or tax incentives to drive engagement? And are they actively going out there and hunting down globally winners who are going to be category leaders? So you can get that halo effect, essentially. When I'm talking to companies, they want to go and locate near companies that are already unicorns. And I think, they all struggle with talent as well. So are they putting in place the right kind of programs with universities that they're, great hunting grounds for talent to come into those companies as well? So signals, I think, for me, are absolutely critical. I think, what are they doing from a regulatory perspective to really help accelerate these companies as well?
Yeah.
And it's tough out there. I mean, we're seeing, for some of my companies in California, we're seeing inbound interest from countries putting together fantastic packages to take cost out of business, to help streamline their regulatory path, to also streamline, the difficulty with space is that it's horizontal. So when you're engaging with governments, you're engaging across multiple different departments. So how can you streamline that, provide a kind of, one-stop shop for everything you need to accelerate your company? Because ultimately, as a company, you're under massive shareholder pressure as a space company because you're raising so much capital, your burn rate's huge. So you want to accelerate that path to hitting those milestones quickly.
Right. And I see Patrick Chase nodding his head to a lot of what you said. Just quickly, Rob, you can even go yes or no on this. I know you've been across Long Island Sound recently up in Connecticut looking at some opportunities. When you look back across at New York State, do you see some of the prerequisites here for the types of things you're talking about to grow the economy?
I don't think we've seen a high number of space startups in that region at the moment. There's companies like Ursa that we've known for some time,
Sure.
but we're not seeing a huge amount of that activity yet. I think there is potentially a very significant customer and capital base there and education base. So I think it's a question of at some point someone's going to wake up to the massive industrial opportunity there and build around that. I'm actually in Connecticut next week, and what's really interesting about that is it's the combination of space and life sciences. So we're increasingly looking at space-based pharma, space biotech. So I think it is bringing industries together there, and I think that's going to be something we see more of in the UK, which is going to combine its huge life sciences industry with space, and that will be basically its calling card more globally.
Very good. You mentioned Ursa Space up in Ithaca, New York, and we'll be up there next month. And my colleague Joe Fargnoli has a special guest today, so more on that later. Patrick, gee, Rob kind of set the table for you. Empire Space has been researching and studying the growth of the space industry in New York. How many space-related commercial enterprises are there, and what's your take on what he's saying about the lack of concentration, I guess?
So I think
here?
everything that Jason and Rob said, I think was pretty much spot on. The work and the data that we've gathered over the last 3 to 4 years kind of proves that. Our census has 284 unique companies operating at 329 sites throughout the state. The vast majority of those are the legacy aerospace companies on Long Island, parts suppliers, various other companies that have DoD contracts or contracts with NASA. In terms of a NASA economy, New York is actually the 15th largest. They publish metrics every year for jobs and economic activity supported by direct work with NASA. New York is 15th. We have large firms. We have L3 Harris. We have specialties and optics and stuff like that. But as Rob just kind of articulated, and the way we conceptualize it is New York has all the pieces of a successful space ecosystem. They are just not currently put together properly. We have companies that do operate here, but you mentioned it. We are a post-industrial state. A lot of the heavy aerospace industry moved out of Long Island years ago, and now you have that constellation of smaller suppliers that used to exist around the giants that now kind of serve the industry that has shifted south and west. We are aware of companies in our time of operation that, say, started up in Brooklyn, but as they grew and needed more access to capital and infrastructure, moved to either Texas or California. And to kind of tie back to what Jason spoke to was the states that are successful, like Colorado, or that want to be successful and are actively engaging in that path, like Maine, have a holistic approach. They have figured out how to put the pieces together. You have an academic pipeline that's feeding into what industry needs. You have capital and financial resources available that those companies need throughout their life cycle. You have a nonprofit sector that offers space for innovation and collaboration and networking. You have state and local governments that are invested, are aware, are informed, are doing proactive things that make it easier for businesses to start up, operate, and grow in the sector in New York. And those are some of the pieces that we think are missing the most. We have the academic institutions. We're home to New York City, so there's no lack of, access or proximity to capital here. It's not being organized properly. And one of the projects we're actually undergoing right now is a needs assessment project. It's actually in conjunction with the special guest that's coming up later, where we conduct an in-depth survey of the private sector companies we've identified in the New York space ecosystem. It's a whole battery of questions about their health, their growth, how they operate, talent acquisition, funding acquisition. And it's still an early sample size. We don't have data from the full industry yet. But a lot of what we've been talking about today is what these companies have begun to tell us. They're able to get funding and resources from government or finance early in the cycle, but that peters out over time and they can't grow. There's a severe lack of research and testing facilities here, which creates bottlenecks in product development and testing and growth. And the biggest thing is connectivity. Most businesses in the state are connected with other space-related enterprises. They're just not also located in New York. Most of them are networked externally with external partners, and they're not networked with potential organizations, academic affiliates, nonprofit affiliates here in New York. So that lack of private sector connectivity is something that has begun to kind of show up to us in the early stages of this review. So New York has all of the pieces. We have legacy industry. We have access to all sorts of different components that you would need to build a successful space ecosystem like they have in Colorado. It's just not being properly networked. And a lot of that ultimately does come down to the lack of, I guess, interest or attentiveness from state government. When you talk about a regulatory environment, when you talk about tax incentives and other policies that can make it easier for companies to start and grow, that's an area that we have identified that New York has historically lagged in. We don't have any major announcements to make today, but I would say that we are hopeful that there are moves coming later this year and early next year that might begin to change that.
Oh, okay. So to quote the Grateful Dead, New York has the ways and means, but the state just won't let you in. I could paraphrase that last part, but it's a state problem, but sounds like good things are happening. Just quickly, Patrick, and if you can, by the way, maybe drop in your URL and any access to documents, because you guys have been doing some great work there. Just quickly, are you seeing any trending with regard to where businesses are being started? I know in the UK, you've got Harwell and places like that where businesses have clustered. Is anything happening in the state outside of New York City that you can say, hey, there's some activity percolating here? Maybe the state economic development officials should wake up. Hopefully they're watching this.
So there are active nodes, so to speak, outside of New York City. Long Island is home to that large cluster of legacy aerospace companies. You have some starting up, some are trying to hang on. And then upstate, you do have these dots, these clusters. In Ithaca around Cornell, you have Ursa Space, which I think, if you're looking for examples of how that collaboration could work, look at Cornell. They're home to the NASA New York Space Grant Consortium, the New York Consortium for Space Technology. They have different programs that bridge that gap between academia and the private sector. And as Rob mentioned, Ursa Space is an example of that. Former Cornell students who grew out and started a company in the sector that's based here in New York. There are clusters in Rochester and Buffalo. A lot of the major upstate cities will have some semblance of, a space economy. Rochester and Buffalo also have major universities like Cornell that kind of tie into that. But a lot of that is the heavy manufacturing, the growth into significant production or significant, research and development. That is the bottleneck, and it does go back to what Rob mentioned: the cost. Due to proximity, to desire to be close to other companies, desire for it to be cheaper. There's a threshold that when certain companies are either thinking about relocating or are in New York and are trying to grow, that cost becomes a factor, and that seems to be one of the biggest limiters that we've encountered in why the sector is not growing as robustly as it.
Okay, so they don't meet some of the Desborough threshold going forward. Okay, thanks, Patrick. As always, right on the money. Carolyn, you've been waiting so patiently out there in Colorado. They've been shouting some kudos out at Colorado. So it seems like you guys are doing it right. So I want you to maybe address that. But given what you know, and that's quite a bit, as you look at the overall landscape for the commercial and civil space sectors, are there trends that lean toward a specific type of service or product where we might see growth, or where states such as Colorado might be able to share with New York State some of the best practices for success?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different pieces that are small in and of themselves, but when you collectively have them, that's part of what has enabled Colorado to be successful. I mean, this recent discussion we've just touched on from Patrick around support from government. We have benefited from outstanding support from our national congressional delegation that has been able to collaborate across party lines to really push what Colorado industry is wanting, so both in the Senate and the House. We also have our Lieutenant Governor just was chair of the Aerospace States Association. So she has been very active in supporting aerospace companies within Colorado. So that government support is really important. And they do a lot of listening and engagement. There's an interesting program that I haven't personally participated in, but love seeing the pictures from because it looks like a hell of a time, where they do a roadshow around the entire state. You know, like New York, Colorado has high density around, you know, our Front Range. So Denver, Boulder, Colorado Springs, these core cities. But then we have a lot of geography that spreads beyond that. And so they're trying to make sure that we can develop in those parts of the state. And so making sure that state officials are connecting with what might be happening on the other side of the mountains or down south towards New Mexico. Touching on maybe back, Louis, to your second question there around where we're starting to see some of this growth and what could be exciting. I think it's really in how the space industry is growing and diversifying in this next stage of development that I think will enable us to have more of these space ecosystems popping up around the US, around the world, that are active in different services than what we've seen before. So not just basic communications, not just Earth observation. And a lot of these companies where there is potential haven't been in space before. They're people who are non-space actors, they're companies who are non-space actors, and they need a lot of support. And so there are opportunities around those services to make them successful. They're not necessarily going to design their constellation, to build it, to launch it, to want to operate it, to want to do the licensing and understand those pieces that are fairly difficult. So I think that's an opportunity that we're seeing, but then more of an opportunity to be those companies, those new commercial activities that are connecting with customers that have been underserved. I was really excited that, Rob mentioned this action in the biomedical space or in the insurance space, two industries that could benefit hugely from space, but haven't really been part of it up until now. So are there new endeavors that could form that connection to the customer? In New York, you have this unique opportunity to support the financial sector because it's so strong in New York City. That's one of the earliest customers that we saw for these low latency communications constellations that's sort of fallen off, but can we try to reconnect with that industry and support them? And then the other one that I would put a pin in that's interesting because it enables more of this growth is mobility in space. It's something that over the last 10 years, we've been trying to figure out. Honestly, no one's really figured it out yet. I know Rob's invested in a few companies that are in that area, and so hopefully they'll be successful. But that mobility and infrastructure in space will really provide that supporting layer on which we can have much more diversity of products and services that are provided through space. And that's a really exciting area where I would hope that can drive more economic development in new zones.
Yeah, that is exciting. And that's an area that, again, you specialize in. You have a unique ability to look inside there and identify what those new sets might be for wealth creation. Last month, we had Nick Reese on from Frontier Foundry, formerly of DHS, talking about how space infrastructure should be the 17th protected category for the United States Space Force and government. It's a critical economic category. He's petitioning for that, but he was elaborating on how important the construction of space infrastructure is. And you and I were on a panel, I think back earlier in the year with Redwire, and they were talking about how they're scaling space infrastructure. Carolyn, when you look at this new sort of climbing out and building the new interstate highway to do the things we need to do in space, like Big Farm and so forth, near term, have you been able to identify any areas where companies and investors should be thinking about, putting their industries out there? I think you understand the question.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because as of right now, we're still in this spot that even though there's so much potential in space, the near term doesn't have a lot of really direct commercial only business cases that have been proven out.
Right.
Where we've landed in the last 10 years is a lot of those that started more on the commercial side have leaned into this reality that right now, simply where the money is much more on the government side. And so being able to have dual use capabilities where you can have more diversity of customers. It's also something investors like to see to make sure that you're not dependent on one customer type, but you can service say here, the US DoD, the single largest customer for space activities. But those customers are starting to shift what they want. So being able to move satellites from one location to another to not be dependent on what you take with you, that's something where we're seeing more interest. It will be interesting for me to see how some of the early space station endeavors can open up activities. It's something that doesn't necessarily have a huge opportunity in terms of the numbers that we need, because there really is going to be scale required within an individual station of having multiple services that can be provided. But I think that's one really interesting area to see if they can unlock new business cases simply by having that one infrastructure that is crewed, that has regular transport to and from returning to Earth. Something we haven't had a lot of is reentry support and capabilities. So I think that's an area that could be interesting to watch.
You're talking about Axiom and those types of ventures.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We got about 4 or 5 minutes left in this segment, and then we pick it up with a big question later. Rob, I'm going to come back to you. New York does seem to be a natural for space commercialization. It certainly, as we've all agreed, has the financial firepower and the proximity to the city. And of course, the talent is appealing. But many of the companies that Patrick's identifying are from elsewhere. We talked about Ursa, our poster child here in the state. Moog is located over in Western New York, over in Buffalo, big company. I think they've got 4 or 5 offices in the UK now even. What's the challenge with enabling a less appealing city or region to benefit from the proximity to capital, talent, and the state's, academic resources? I mean, the young talent, frankly, comes to New York City. I see it every day coming in. Do they want to come to Syracuse? Do they want to come to Reading in the UK? I mean, how big a factor is that going to be?
I think it's a huge factor. And we're seeing this within a UK environment already. And the UK has chosen, I think, because of heritage reasons, to build a space cluster in Harwell, but it's actually quite difficult to attract talent to Harwell. If you're looking to attract the best of breed, brightest minds, post-PhD engineers, they don't want to live in Harwell. Oxford is too expensive. They want to live in London and have a short commute outside of London. And we're actually seeing some space companies now setting up in Reading, which is basically a 20-25-minute commute. So I think that is something to really consider, because it's the talent you need is the talent coming straight out of university. It's talent in its 20s that needs that nice cultural makeup, not just to be stuck in the middle of a business park, miles away from friends, family, pubs, and everything else.
Yeah. Carolyn, let me just jump to you, because we know New York is a great place to be, every city really, but that's a bit of a bias. Colorado doesn't have any problems, right, in that area? I mean, doesn't everybody want to live in Colorado now?
An awful lot of people want to live in Colorado. Yeah,
well,
I've now worked for 2 companies that have, one moved from California here, and then one set up their first US office in Colorado. So, and a big part of that is lifestyle, right? I mean, as we see the Bay Area becoming more and more expensive, a lot of companies are moving here or to Seattle, but now Colorado is becoming very expensive. And so I think that is a challenge that we'll start to see. And there's also so much density here in terms of space companies that talent is starting to become tight here as well. So it's a sort of a double-edged sword with that growth.
Yeah. Patrick, I'm going to circle. Go ahead. We got about a minute. I want to circle back on this question with you when we get to the big question, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to kind of articulate what they said. New York has that kind of brain drain problem. People come up to Syracuse University, they'll come to UB or something like that, but all the jobs are located out of New York. The city has lots of financial resources available, but a lot of them are invested in companies outside of New York. And New York has those same cost pressures. So I just kind of wanted to echo exactly what Carolyn and Rob were just talking about. And we've kind of found that here as well.
Yeah. Okay. Again, we'll circle back on this in a way when we get to our 1 o'clock segment, and we welcome our audience, our great audience every month back, and thank you for the chats and for participating. So we'll be getting back into this at 1 o'clock. But in the meantime, speaking of one of upstate New York's great assets, if you come to Rochester, you actually get to meet Joseph Fargnoli, the founder of the New York Space Alliance. Joe, what do you think based on what you've heard here today? We've covered a lot of ground in terms of the investment readiness, the appeal of certain places, the lack of support for the states. I know you've also got a special guest waiting for you, but what do you think?
Well, first of all, I think it was a great conversation. I really appreciate everybody joining us today. What comes to me is this concept of the New York state of mind, great Billy Joel song. What is the New York state of mind pertaining to space? And when I think about that, I think about really in the great state of New York, how Elon Musk is not really greatly admired by a lot of people. It's what I call the Elon culture. And I think back to the attitude of space towards the defense industry. I feel like we need a reboot of the New York state of mind around space, to think about space as a way of advancing humanity, not as a means of as a military platform that a fairly liberal state is not turned on to, but a means of advancing peace and prosperity of humankind. I spent quite a bit of time doing space business in Colorado and in California. And in Colorado, I'll call it the Colorado attitude. They've got a cowboy attitude towards space where they're not afraid of it. They're starting businesses. I've been doing business in Colorado in space for 25 years, and there's been a lot of great space pioneers there working without a lot of infrastructure. No one was crying because there weren't government programs, but they circled the wagons, they got together, and they've been building one hell of a nice space industry. So I think really got to start there is with what is our attitude towards space? And really, pointing out to the UK example, and thank you, Rob, for joining us today. I think the UK example is a great shining star, not just for the UK, but for any nation or region that wants to become a space economy. As the UK exited the European Union with Brexit, UK, as I understand it, in reading the UK space strategy, they stood up and said, we're going to pull ourselves up into a space economy. And there's been a bit of a concentration towards that because their attitude, their state of mind was, we're going to do it. We're not going to rely on anybody else. We're going to do it ourselves. So it starts there with this belief that this is a viable path for the future development of peace and prosperity for a people who want to be autonomous and free and determining their own destiny. Okay. So I really want to thank Rob for coming and sharing his perspective. I think Harwell's a pretty cool place, a lot of great stuff going on. I'm personally tracking some UK space programs. BAE is doing some great stuff there. And it's a great story of people, just taking their own responsibility. So hats off to the UK. I want to thank Patrick again. I'm a big fan of Patrick and what these guys are doing because they're bringing data to the discussion. You and I, Lou, we use our hands when we talk, right? But Patrick brings numbers and papers, and I really appreciate that great work, Patrick. And I'm really glad that you guys are doing what you're doing with Cornell.
Yeah, we can help you with your hands.
He points out that, everyone says they want to be Silicon Valley. The original Silicon Valley, in some ways, you could say, has been New York State, right? Where was the computer invented? Where did IBM start? So this confluence that's needed to be a Silicon Valley is vision, strong academic environment, strong industrial capability, and a strong finance community. Guess what? We've got 3 of those 4. We've lost the vision, but we've got the academic, the industrial, and the finance community. The issue is, how do we help rebuild New York State's vision for the establishment of a space economy? And little old Maine up there, developing a 2030 strategy, an example of a state punching above its weight. We're punching far below our weight in New York State. And, I'm a big fan of Texas, and there's a lot of regulatory reasons why Texas is a great place to do business, even from legal standpoints. They're probably going to do things that will supersede what Delaware's corporate structures are doing. But the audacity to set up a Texas Space Commission, again, it's the attitude that a space has towards the industry. And if we could find a way to collectively shift our focus from thinking it as a Vietnam-era defense technology to a technology of the next century and decade to propel humanity forward, I think there's going to be a lot of energy in New York State to propel the space economy forward. And again, Patrick will show that we've got the points that we need, but do we have the attitude? And I think this is part of what we want to do next month in Cornell, when we're at Cornell for our event. And we've got Megan Surdock with us, who's the Associate Director for the NASA New York Space Grant. Has Megan joined us at this point? But I'd like to give her a little bit of a opportunity to discuss what we're hoping to do in Ithaca next week. Because again, Cornell is a fantastic place. Dr. Mason Peck there has been a great professor, great proponent, was Ursa's mentor in many ways. A lot of great stuff to come out of Ithaca. So Megan, great to have you join us. What can you tell us about what the NASA New York Space Grant is doing and what we should expect in lovely Ithaca next month?
Hey, yeah, so I'm happy to join you
Megan.
guys. Oh. Hi,
No,
everybody.
you made it.
I
Megan,
know,
by the way,
I'm very
Yeah.
sorry. I was in another meeting. I couldn't see a clock and then I had to run to a different office,
No,
but I'm happy
that's-
to be here. And I'm happy to talk a little bit about the New York Consortium for Space Technology, Innovation and Development. So NYCST is a collaborative initiative and it's led by Cornell's Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering Department in partnership with a lot of organizations, both on campus and across the state and the region. So we were awarded the designation of a defense manufacturing community. And we've been working over the past year to really build up this consortium. And we have a couple different goals. We want to bolster the innovation of space technology in the state and the region. We want to support small businesses and address critical skills gaps in the workforce. So we're doing a lot of different things to achieve that. We had a symposium earlier this year. We had competitive award funding. And we're looking forward to having everybody come to campus next week, or not next week, next month, to show you guys the facilities that we have and talk more about what we're doing to help that growth of the space industry in the state.
Megan, thanks so much for doing this. You know, I don't know how many people are familiar with upstate New York. You know, we've all been in New York City. What can people expect when they see Cornell in September? And of course, the facilities that are now in place up there for the space industry.
Right. So we're going to have the event at the Statler Hotel, which is a really exciting space on campus. It's beautiful. We had our symposium there. And I can promise you that the food is going to be great. Our symposium follow-up, that was our #1 comment, was the food is great. But it's really, they created these spaces that are perfect for networking. So we're going to bounce through a couple of different rooms. One is set up with tables looking at a presenter. Another one is just a big open space where we're going to have a mix of high and low top tables for people to mix and mingle. And I mean, campus this time of year is beautiful. It's buzzing with students who are here on campus. September, sometimes if we're lucky, the leaves are starting to change. And it's a great place to walk around and really get a feel for the environment. And speaking specifically about our spaces, we're going to be setting up a tour, and actually we're currently in the beginning stages of renovation, but we have a couple rooms that are already finished. So if anybody attended our symposium in June, there will be a couple of updates. And so Ward Laboratory was a building that had gone unused for a really long time, but they have this amazing high bay area that we're eventually going to have a mission operations center. So you're going to see the before. We're going to have different testing facilities like a vibration test and a thermal vacuum chamber that you're going to be able to see. We'll have lab spaces. And then this summer, we had a lot of students working on different capabilities of kind of a preview of what a 6 degree of freedom will look like in the missions in the high bay area controlled by missions operations. So we'll have that tour all set for everybody who would like to come and see. We're excited to start showing it off. And that's a little bit about Ithaca in the fall.
It's great, Megan. And again, the consortium is beginning to stitch together this disparate but emerging economy here. So, and also there, when we say grant consortium, there are grants being issued through you guys, right? So people interested in that, you should also attend. Am I right?
Yep, absolutely. So just a little preview on that. We give out awards on an annual basis and we're very new. So it's our first year. So we just gave out our first group of awards. We awarded 6 organizations. You can find out more about those awardees on our website, which I can drop in the chat. And there's a range of opportunities for awarding. So one of the projects is Science Buddies. They're creating workforce development for K through 12 programming. And another one is that 6th degree of freedom that is going to be put into the high bay. So we have a lot of different projects that are going on, but we are going to have this as at least an annual grant funding opportunity, if not more often. So we're excited to start funding different opportunities throughout the state and the region.
Yeah, and if they go there, of course, they can meet you. They can meet Joe Fargnoli in person. Patrick Chase and his partner Evan will be there. Tamara, of course, she will be appearing, cameo appearance. And Rob and Carolyn, you're very welcome to attend. We would love to have you there. And you talk at there's 6 degrees of good wine up there too. That's the Finger Lakes area, right? We've got terrific local wines in addition to that plowed plate food.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Megan, thanks so much. And Joe, thanks, for the New York Minute. We'll get more of it up in Ithaca. So thank you both.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
All right. Tamara, before we get to our big question, I think we've got a few quick announcements. Yes?
Absolutely. Yes.
By the way, they were talking about that talent. Patrick was talking about talent that, starts off in Brooklyn and leaves, all that super talent. I was thinking of you. You kind of left Brooklyn, but you stayed in New York State.
I'm still here in the state, though.
I know. Thank God.
If I could go back to Brooklyn, I would. Yeah, my life is very Poughkeepsie these days, but seriously, Brooklyn is the place to
Poughkeepsie
be.
state of mind. Yeah. Nice too.
All right, so this is what we've been talking about, everyone. I put the note in the chats so that you can register for the event. It is September 18th. I don't know why this does not say September 18th, but that's the day. It's September 18th, and it's going to be an all-day thing. We will be doing some of it hybrid, but not most of it. So we really do want you there. So please do come. Lou, over to you.
Yes, and John, now for a few quick announcements.
Yes.
Actually, I'm going to turn this one back over to you. This is SSPY's, our Women in Space Engagement. There's an event coming up tomorrow talking about growth strategies and challenges in the space sector. Kind of a relevant topic. Anything else we need to know about that, Tamara?
Yeah, we're creating this space to begin an exploration of the topic of professionals in our industry who come from business development, economic, marketing backgrounds. We're exploring interest to continue gauging how do we deal with this aspect of our business and our industry, and do we want to have a special working group just for this sector? So come on out, let us know if you're interested, if you like this kind of content. It's happening tomorrow at 2 p.m. and you can always visit wise.sspi.org to register.
And WISE remains, I think, our fastest growing special interest group. So if you're not involved, please do. And you can be outside the membership and do this. You do not need to be an SSPI member. Am I correct? You
can come to the event if you are not a member, and you can come to the event if you're not a woman also. It's totally open. So the goal is to engage women, but everyone is welcome to our public events.
Very good. And that's tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern.
Yes.
This is for the audience. SBQ, our Space Business Qualified course, which, as Carolyn and others were talking about, as we develop more talent, it's coming from outside the industry. So there is a lack of kind of knowledge about the industry itself. So we've created, along with GSOA, a Space Business Qualified course, which you can take online, or your company can take, your employees can take, to become more space literate, develop a better space IQ. So here's a question for all you folks out there in the audience. Let's see how smart you are. Here's the question. Use the chats to see if you can answer that correctly. And we'll let you know. Tamara will let you know online at the end whether you're correct or not. So there's the question right there.
All right. I've got the note that I'm saving the answer till the end. Okay.
Right. Which company below does not belong to that category? And we'll be taking the roundtable again to London at the end of September, 30 September. we have a session on space debris. We're talking about clearing up without getting cleared out. Massimiliano Lodavez, the COO of the Eutelsat Group, will have someone from the UK Space Agency, which has just had its sort of huddle, new government huddle on this topic. Astroscale will be there. Hogan Lovells will be the host, and that will be a terrific event. We were honored to have Rob Desborough, who's with us today, on that panel last week. And I think, Rob, you had a pretty good experience last month at the London Roundtable.
That's right, Nick.
See how enthusiastic he was? He really enjoyed it. Okay. Well, let's go back to the questioning. And again, this is for the audience. Feel free to participate here and ask our panel questions, or you can come on. And if there's someone here, Joe, from New York State government, we really want them on to come on, don't we?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. I'm just looking for some concurrence there. So here's the big question. It's one we're going to ask next month as well. Why not New York? All right, we've heard about all these other places. My God, even Botswana is getting in the game, or Luxembourg has been in the game for a long time. Space agencies, I believe Rob said there were 80 now developed around the world. Why not New York? Patrick Chase, why not New York?
I mean, I think the easy answer kind of goes back to what Rob was discussing was the cost. I think when you look at why there is not, why the company's left over time, and it's not just the aerospace sector. I'm from Rochester. We used to be the headquarters of Kodak, Xerox, and Bausch and Lomb. We are no longer the headquarters of Xerox and Bausch and Lomb, and Kodak is a ghost of its former self. Like most of the heavy manufacturing and heavy industry has left the state over the last couple of decades. So that's not really unique to the sector. I think the key that's unique to the New York space sector as to why we are held back is what Joe was speaking to, which is the mentality, which is the vision. There's no statewide. There is a growing kind of statewide awareness, but for the longest time there wasn't any statewide awareness within the sector. People didn't know that they had partners out there. Everyone was externally focused. Students were graduating and leaving the state. Financial firms were investing in space outside of the state. Companies were starting, and to grow, they were leaving the state. And so that vision for New York's unique contributions to the space sector, we don't have a story. We don't tell a good story about the history of space here in New York. We built the lunar landers. There are still the base of the lunar modules on the lunar surface. There are still parts inside that say made in New York, but no one here knows that. We don't teach that in school. So we don't tell a good story about our history of contributions to the state of New York. We've had phenomenal astronauts who've come from here. We invest in all these key technologies. Most of the major telescopes that have ever gone up had optics that were built and refined in upstate New York specifically. But we don't tell that story. We don't know that story. We don't articulate that story, even among the space community. And so how would we expect the general public or state government or elected leaders or economic development agents to know that story too? So I think, on a kind of more philosophical level, yes, we could talk about regulations and tax policy. All that's critically important. But I think at the base level, as a sector, we need to start telling that story to ourselves and to other people. And that's what creates that vision. I was really interested to hear what Rob said about Connecticut and that tie between space and life sciences and how they're starting to develop their kind of own identity, a unique path that they're going to kind of develop on. I think eventually New York will need to do that. And the reality is that will be made much easier depending on the stance and interest from state government. I think that is probably one of the biggest glaring deficiencies between New York and the other states. I mean, in Colorado, the Space Coalition there is chaired by the lieutenant governor. It is very difficult to have much more involvement from state government than that. They're clearly, the legislature is informed, they're invested, they're making decisions consciously that benefit this sector. And in New York, it's just absent. There just does not seem to kind of be that awareness. In fits and starts, it'll kind of pop up in the legislature, but that to us is kind of the biggest area of focus. We need to tell that story. We need to have that vision, and then ultimately we need state government to respond to it.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you for your passion on that. Rob, is historical ignorance about an industry's legacy an important factor in building the kind of investment-ready place that you spoke so well about today?
I think it is, Lou. I mean, we were putting our first satellites up in, the late 50s, 60s. We had launch, or we were investigating launch capability in the late 60s. And then we decided it wasn't, it was too expensive from an industrial strategy perspective. So, we basically peeled our industry off for many decades until the small sat revolution came along. But what I think is really interesting about New York here is, all of us are talking about how do we get a chunk of this multi-trillion-dollar industry that's being built. And what's unique about New York is financial services. Someone has to finance this $1.8 trillion economy that's being built. It needs specialist products, it needs specialist services, it needs investments across the whole funding continuum. So, and what do all space startups need? Capital. That is absolutely front of mind. So you can probably solve this problem by actually just getting all the banks to recognize there is a huge amount of money to be made in space. You've got companies are raising twice as much capital at a stage earlier than the normal generalist tech startup companies. So you get much bigger deposits. So that's super attractive for banks. And then they're going all the way through to IPOs. Who's going to own that market and build the right kind of products for companies that should be raising, very large sums of debt funding when they've got their minimum viable constellation on the back of, massive kind of government contracts, but at the moment, there aren't fit for purpose products. So I think turning on the financial community to how big this industry is and make it analogous to, the internet in the 90s or software in the 80s is something you could probably do relatively rapidly. Then hopefully that will attract companies to want to locate to New York.
And a lot of that is narrative, as Patrick said, telling that story and mobilizing that capital as well. Well said. Carolyn, it sounds like Colorado asked that question. Why not Colorado? I don't think they asked the question, why not New York? But when they asked, why not Colorado? Colorado had an answer. Yeah, it should be Colorado, and here's how, and we're not going to get it done. I want to ask you, though, because you travel the world and you spend time in New York. Why not New York?
I definitely agree with both of the sentiments that have been expressed. I'll say from a Colorado perspective, we have a statue of an astronaut right when you walk into the airport. So every, child sees that when they're coming home from, a holiday to Disney or somewhere else. I think another piece of it, and this came up earlier, is access to customers. That is a huge thing that we have here that is, not a choice Colorado made to benefit from having NORAD and 2 Space Force bases and the Air Force Academy, but something that was here. But you can also have a huge customer base in New York. There is so much economic activity in New York that can be transferred into the next stage of space customers. As this economy is growing, it's going to reach new customers. You can be a specialist in, whatever section of that ecosystem you want and really build it from the ground up. And that could be, a competitive edge that New York uniquely has against other states. So I think it's choosing where is it that you have your best shot at putting those investment dollars you have into capturing something that doesn't exist yet and being the one who can build it.
Yeah. Again, great point. We've got about a minute or so left. Joe, 30 seconds. Why not New York? And why should they go to Ithaca to find out? Oh, Joe doesn't want to answer. Joe, do you want to answer that? No, I guess not. Okay, Tamara.
I'll
Why
answer.
not Joe? Why not Joe? Yeah, why don't you answer it? And then give us the answer to that quiz. And then we'll you can sing us off the air, as they say.
Not today. Nope. Listen. I really loved, I want to call out, this is the smallest point, but it's not that small, that the cool kids want to be in the city. And so, And so the idea of New York doing a better job of talking up all of the rest of the state, which is something that it started trying to do, but it needs to do more of. And what are the benefits and wonders and great things about over here and over there? You know, I think this is also a sliver of what needs to happen to make New York an attractive space destination.
Yep.
Okay.
And we've talked about how to make it a better satellite and space world. So that is a part of the layer here, I think, to the narrative.
Yes. All right,
answer-
I'm gonna do this thing where I share my screen again.
While she's doing that, I want to thank Carolyn, Belle, Patrick Chase, Rob Desborough, Megan Serdock, our friend Joe Fargnoli, Tamara. I always want to thank you, our sponsors, our supporting organizations, and you, the audience, who just show up every month, even in the summer, to be a part of this experience. We really thank you for it. Maybe we'll see you upstate next month or in London at the end of the month. London is really great too.
All right, well, folks, here was our question. Oh, wait, are you seeing the screen? Which screen are you looking at?
I'm looking at the question.
Okay, well, I hope you're looking at the right question. We'll see. Anyway, here was our question, and here, for those of you who are inquiring minds, is the answer. So, there you go. There is no such company as Big Bird.
There you go. But Rob, maybe someday there will be, eh? Okay.
They're rebranding right now.
It'll be located in New York. Why not?
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone. Listen, enjoy the rest of your summer.
Take care, everybody.
see you
Hope
next
to
month.
see everyone in
Bye.
Ithaca
Thanks,
next month. Bye-bye.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.